In December 1944, the landscape of the Ardennes was cold and desolate. The skeletal trees stood beneath a heavy, snow-laden sky, their limbs swaying in the sharp wind that drove snowflakes across the forest floor. Beneath a camouflage net, inside a frozen M10 Wolverine tank destroyer. Private First Class Ray Thompson watched through his fogged periscope. His breath came in shallow bursts, and his gloved hands trembled, not from fear, but from the bitter cold that seeped through the metal and bones of the tank. About 800 yards away, a line of German tanks slowly snaked through the trees. There were 12 in total, mostly Panzer IV models, with a Tiger I leading the way. Behind them were half-tracks filled with infantry, followed by fuel trucks. They were heading toward a critical crossroad, a strategic point that, if captured, would cut off supplies and reinforcements to the encircled 101st Airborne Division in Bastogne. Thompson had no orders to fire. He was merely instructed to observe, report, and wait. But as the tanks advanced, he knew what was about to happen, and without permission, he made a decision. He pulled the trigger just 3 days earlier, inside a farmhouse near the Belgian front. Thompson had sat through a briefing with the rest of the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion. His commanding officer had given clear orders. No one fires without confirmation from command. I don't care what you see. I don't care how close they are. We do not give away our position unless ordered. The room had gone quiet, and the men nodded, but beneath the surface there was tension. Everyone knew that the enemy was advancing fast. Outside, the Battle of the Bulge had just begun. On December 16th, the German army launched its last major offensive on the Western Front under the cover of fog and snow. Operation Watch on the Rhine aimed to split the Allied lines, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. The Germans hit with over 200,000 men, more than 1,000 tanks, and absolute surprise, American lines buckled, and many units vanished overnight. Commanders feared the worst. Friendly fire from behind might be just as dangerous as the enemy in front. So the rule was clear: wait for orders. For Thompson, that meant being on observation duty. He and his crew were stationed in a ridge near a forest road just north of Noville, a town near Bastogne. They had good cover, a clear line of sight, and an icy view of the valley below, but no permission to engage. Thompson spent day and night scanning the terrain, marking tank tracks, counting stripped pines, and making detailed notes in a small notebook his mother had sent him months earlier. He logged everything: range, bearing, wind speed, but never fired. Thompson wasn't reckless. He was precise. He studied how the German columns moved, how they organized their vehicles, how they stacked armor for support, and where their weaknesses lay. He understood German doctrine and knew exactly where to hit them, but he didn't know yet that he would be the one to make that decision. Raymond Charles Thompson wasn't born a soldier. He grew up in western Kansas, a place where winter winds could peel paint off barns and summer heat could crack open the wheat fields. His father ran a small engine repair shop, and his mother was a 7th-grade math teacher. Even as a boy, Thompson had an eye for precision. He could calculate distances by the shadows of grain silos and built slingshots with pulley systems to test how far he could launch a stone. He didn't enlist because he was eager for battle. He joined in 1942 to study engineering, with the Army offering the training, pay, and future he sought. But the future depended on surviving Europe. When Thompson arrived in Normandy, he was 22 years old, already looking 5 years older. His first combat experience came in the hedgerows, where the enemy could be just 10 feet away, and you wouldn't know until they were firing. He witnessed the brutal deaths of friends and stopped believing in luck or safety. Instead, he focused on patterns, the way tanks moved, how they paused, how long it took for their turrets to rotate. He kept a small notebook, sketching every German vehicle, noting vulnerabilities and blind spots. Thompson wasn't talkative. Other soldiers called him the quiet clock because when he spoke, it was always direct and timed. But when it came to gunnery, he was deadly. Not flashy or fast, just precise. The Army saw him as a good gunner, disciplined, calm under fire, and smart. But what they didn't realize was that Thompson wasn't just a trigger puller. He was a tactician. He could see the battlefield like a chessboard, and in 3 days, his calm, calculating mind would change the rules of engagement in one burst of firepower. On the morning of December 19, 1944, Ray Thompson saw the German column approaching. Through his periscope, he identified the unmistakable shape of a Tiger I tank at the front, followed by Panzer IVs and half-tracks, their tight, disciplined formation moving through the narrow forest road. It was a textbook armored assault, but to Thompson, it was a trap. The road led directly to Noville's crossroads, a vital point for the Allies. If the Germans captured it, they would cut off Bastogne's supply line and cause catastrophe. Thompson had no orders to fire. His only communication with his command was weak and intermittent. He could move to reposition, but that risked exposure. He was supposed to observe and report, but he wasn't watching a column in transit. He was watching a threat to the American line. He knew that firing too early would scatter the enemy, and a wrong target could cause overwhelming retaliation. But if he fired with precision, taking out the right vehicles in the right order, he could dismantle the column piece by piece. Ray Thompson had never disobeyed orders before, not once, but now, staring at a perfect opportunity. He realized that waiting was no longer caution. It was suicide, without permission, no backup, and no clearance. He adjusted the angle, held his breath, and fired. He didn't target the lead tank. He aimed for the third. The shot exploded in the flank of the 3rd Panzer IV, sending a shockwave through the trees and igniting a plume of fire and smoke. The German column came to an immediate halt, but Thompson wasn't done. He shifted position, fired again, and took out the 6th vehicle, a half-track filled with infantry. The explosion set the vehicle ablaze, scattering bodies and igniting the forest underbrush. Panic spread among the Germans. The Tiger tried to reverse, but the column was too tightly packed. Thompson reloaded and fired at the fuel truck at the end of the column, causing a massive explosion that shook the hillside. The chaos intensified as the Germans scrambled, firing wildly into the trees, unsure where the shots were coming from. To them, it felt like an ambush by a full battery of American tanks, but in reality, it was just Ray Thompson and his crew, following his precise plan. As the enemy broke into confusion, Thompson moved again, using the forest terrain for cover and elevation. He fired, dismantling the German column one vehicle at a time, each shot calculated to exploit the weaknesses of their formation. The Germans, unable to comprehend what was happening, began to invent enemies that didn't exist. They believed they were under attack from multiple angles, when in fact, there was only one man, one gun, and a perfect understanding of battlefield geometry. By the time Thompson's crew had fired their last round, the road was littered with burning vehicles. At least 5 were destroyed, 3 were immobilized, and the rest of the column had retreated in disarray. Thompson had not just fired a gun, he had dismantled an entire German assault. When the scouts from the 101st Airborne arrived 2 days later, they found the forest road filled with German wreckage. They asked which unit had destroyed the column. The answer, one gunner. Word spread quickly among the ranks, and soon everyone knew about the guy from Kansas who had single-handedly taken out a Panzer column. Thompson filed his report, knowing he had disobeyed orders. His commanding officer, Captain Langston, read it quietly, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. But when Langston sent the report upstairs, it wasn't to reprimand Thompson, it was to study his actions. The Army began teaching his firing pattern, using it as a model for battlefield engagement. Thompson never considered himself a hero. After the war, he returned home to Kansas, married, and ran a small repair shop. He never sought recognition, but others called him a hero. Decades later, the Army would adopt his method of asymmetrical engagement sequencing, a concept that revolutionized tank destroyer tactics during the Cold War. Ray Thompson didn't break the rules. He simply stepped past them long enough to do what had to be done.